ready to begin? School bell is ringing, dong, dong, dong. It's a pleasure to be here. I feel like this is old hometown week. I know about half of you, and I've seen probably others of you around the place. Let me tell you just in advance about what we're going to do tonight. I'm going to talk for about half the program, and then I've brought along some slides of, what subject would you guess? Clouds, to show you for the second half. I'm going to start off with sort of something you might call confessions of the weatherman. You know, when you are so-called the weatherman, well, you carry a heavy mantle of responsibility, but you develop a sense of humor and you also develop a thick skin. Sometimes when people say, what's the weather going to be, I say, no longer am I having to forecast the weather, I'm now a commentator upon the weather. But that makes it a lot easier. But one of the things that I've passed out to you here is something that is really a prized possession. It's a first. In fact, this didn't exist as such until about an hour ago. Literally. Background story on this is the following. I'm Johnny-come-lately when it comes to computers, but here in the last 2 or 3 years, I've finally gotten into the act. If you can't beat them, you have to join them. And if there's ever a humbling experience is to get into the computer world. So I happen to have the good fortune of having a mentor who's a young fellow from Linfield College. So when I get stuck, I give John Smith a call, and he comes over and gets me out. For a long period of time, I've intended to do something and finally got around to doing it, which leads me to sort of the first little story I want to tell you. I would guess maybe 25% of the people in this audience would know a man, Al Wheeldon. How many know Al Wheeldon? All of him? Yeah. Well, when we came to town in 1958, and I'm a professor, retired at Linfield, we met the Wheeldons and became very close friends with him and his wife through the church, Methodist Church. But also I found that he was a real weather nut. For years he'd been keeping records of weather using his backyard instruments. And over a period of time, as I saw what he had, it seemed like it made sense to share these with the community. And so that was the start of Mac Weather, summarizing the weekly observations and then printing them in the News Register. Well, time went along, and Al got old, and ill health came along, and he had to move down to Medford to be closer to his daughter. And so it sort of fell to me to keep up the records, and I've done that. And the records that you see are the combination of Wheeldon/Day records that go back to 1946. And this is a pretty substantial body of record in one set of comparisons. Obviously it isn't several hundred years old, but it's nearly 50 years old. But these have never been put into the computer, and I've finally, in the last couple of weeks, gotten the data into the computer and a readout in terms of a graph. Well, the funny part of this little story is that it went down to Mac Prescription to their photocopy machine to get some copies run off. And I was sort of in a hurry this evening, and when I came out, it was to find that there was a tremendous shower. So not for the first time in my life has the weatherman been stuck and wondering, do I go out and get drenched, or do I wait out the shower? And one of the ladies there at Mac's Prescription said, "Who'll loan you?" So I went out like this. If I'd been sensible, I would have had my weatherman's umbrella along. And even though it's not raining when we have the parades downtown. At any rate, that's sort of the background. If you'd like to, this is not primarily tonight about this particular set of records, but if you'd like to sort of scan this, You notice there have been some peaks, a pretty high rainfall, annual rainfall back in '96 was the biggest, and get up to over 80 inches. And then down in '85, there was less than 30 inches. So things go on to cause a variation. The last column is the average rainfall, which is 45 inches here in the valley. That's really a very nice sort of moderate type of climate thing. And we live very comfortably in the valley here in rainfall terms. It's interesting for you to maybe think El Nino-wise and sort of establish correlations between the 7-year periodicity of the El Nino years and the periodicity that you see here in this rainfall record. But at any rate, some of you probably keep your own records, but this I think will be a good adjunct for you to have just to keep for your records. Well, I have with apologies to the politicians, I have a stump speech. The stump speech of the politicians is the same theme with minor elaborations depending upon the location of the talk and the constituency to whom they're talking. I gave this stump speech the other night, last Thursday, out here at McMinnville Residential Estates. We had about 20 people show up. And in a place like that, endemic is the issue of boredom. These are people that have time on their hands. Their bodies say that they can't go any place anymore, really. And so they're bored. Television, okay, well, television helps out a little, but it certainly is not a complete answer to boredom. But my stump speech says that to people who have time on their hands, a great antidote to boredom is to look out and look up and look at the wonders of the sky. The sky is a wonderful place to alleviate boredom. Now, there are numbers of reasons for this. One time I put together a little piece that says 10 reasons to look up at the sky. And if anybody's interested in one of these, I have a few copies. But let's think of some of these 10 reasons and why they are points that make it desirable to look up and out and see the near sky. Just in passing, I call it near sky because we're not talking about the sky of stars and planets here. We're talking about the lower portion of the sky, the troposphere, in which clouds are resident. Well, for one thing, the sky is the biggest free show on Earth. Now, who can pass up a free show? Well, a lot of people pass up a free show. But the sky, with all its beautiful, not always beautiful, but always changing cloud forms, is there for the looking. All you have to do is open your eyes and see it. The problem and the pity is really that most people, since we all, I include myself, were born into the sky, so to speak, that is, these clouds were there when we were born, these are things that we basically take for granted. Now, the sky is sort of like what we might call visual muzak. You know what muzak is? It's the noise passing for music that you hear in elevators and supermarkets, and you hear it, but you don't hear it. And the point is also to be made for the sky. You see it, but you don't see it. You don't perceive it. And this is the reason for this is that you're not consciously aware of it all the time. Your attention is not drawn to it consciously. But there are benefits without measure that come from getting involved in the sky, and I'll speak to this point a little more later on. The sky is majestic, it's a source of awe and wonder, it's beautiful. The sky is a billboard of change. The clouds, to a practiced observer, tell you about what's going to happen tomorrow. And the old sea captains, the masters of the sailing vessels, became very adept at reading the sky. And they did it because their welfare, their livelihood, their safety was dependent upon accurately foretelling what was going to happen so they could adjust sails, etc., of their sailing ships. Well, the sky, looking at the sky, provides a positive way for you to use your free time, and it also is something which appeals to your sensitive nature, and it gives you a feeling of connectedness with nature, feeling upbeat, and it even gives you a global consciousness when you are aware of the fact that the water molecules that make up the clouds that you're observing 5 days ago might have been resident over Japan or the Philippine Islands or something like this. The water continuously is in this recycling process, this great recycling process, which is called the water cycle. And just in passing, let me satisfy my own curiosity to see how avid readers you folks are. Did anybody read my column about 2 or 3 weeks ago about how it is that all the water that falls from the sky gets replaced? Anybody? Well, there are massive amounts of water that have to rise from the sea up to the high atmosphere in order to get involved in clouds, which then get involved in the production of precipitation products, which fall out. And when you start to add up the numbers of the weight of water that falls out on the ground, it's immense, absolutely immense. So when you become a part of this whole thing, you get involved. And the thing that is bad with boredom is withdrawal. You just get inside like this, and this is poor old me, I'm bored. Look out and see. I was going to speak about 3 people that have been influential in my life that relate to this general topic. One of these is a person who has been imprisoned in California for a long time. She did something terrible. I don't know what she did, but she's been in for 15 years and still has another 5 to go. My attention was brought to her, Donna Cresap is her name, through another party that I'll speak of in a minute. And we have carried on a very interesting correspondence for 2.5 years now. There's a limit. We've set up sort of an artificial limit where, in terms of getting to know her personally, I don't want to get to know her personally, and she does not interfere with my life, but we correspond. Why Donna Cresap? Well, she has the reputation in her prison as the Cloud Lady. And the thing that she does, and has gained a reputation for doing, is when she does her hourly walk around the prison yard, is that she's not doing like this, but she's doing like this. Now, why is this crazy woman looking up at the sky all the time? What's there to see up in the sky? Well, the thing that she sees in the sky are these wonderful clouds, and the variety and beauty, etc., of the clouds are the things that leave her sane in an insane environment. She thrives on the stuff that I send to her that relate to weather, cloud pictures, and we've had some wonderful interchange. She came to my attention through another person who came to my attention 15 or so years ago. This is a man whose name is Jack Borden, and if I hear my wife say, it's because she's heard about Jack Borden umpteen numbers of times, to the point where she just as soon not hear about it again. But I gave her the option of staying home, and she decided to come, so too bad, Mary. I have to listen about Jack Borden again. Jack Borden was a television newsman, Boston, and one time he and his wife went out on a hike in the nature preserve north of Boston, and it was a nice sunny day. After hiking and having lunch, he decided to lie down for a nap in the meadow. After the nap, he woke up, and wow, something had happened. Now, most of you are probably tied in with some church and so forth, so you know the story of Saul on the road to Damascus. And you know how smashing his experience was as he had the encounter with the risen Christ. Well, Jack Borden doesn't talk in those terms, but he says that in 1,000th of a second, now this is a guy 45 years old, a hard-boiled news guy, television, in 1,000th of a second, he saw more sky, more of the sky than he's seen in all his 45 years up to that time. Now ponder that. There was an awakening. If you drew a graph of this, this is one of these things that has a spike that goes like that. So Jack Borden didn't know what to do with this, but he was profoundly affected. And so one of the things he did after a few days or a week or so was take his television crew downtown Boston, and he'd come up to folks and he'd come up and say, ma'am, would you tell me the state of the sky? Sir, would you tell me the state of the sky?
Tell me what?
Well, you know, here people are walking around, doing their thing, looking down the sidewalk, and only about 2 in 10 had any real awareness of what that beautiful sky of the day was. You know, they were not looking up. This is back to the same point I made earlier. There was an interesting feedback on that, you know. It was pretty much what he expected. Next stage in his story is that his neighbor across the back fence was principal of a grade school. She'd been complaining about how bored her children were, her students. So Jack is now trying to digest the implications of this whole thing. So talking with her, they said, hey, considering what happened to me, maybe the thing you ought to try with your students is to get them to think about sky. You know, let's use the sky as an integrating theme for your whole series of classes and see what happens. So she was willing to go along. She was sort of down at the bottom, wondering what on earth she could do. And so the thing that they started to do was integrate the sky into the day-by-day curriculum. They had the kids write a sky journal. You know, how does the weather affect you? They had the kids keep track of the weather day by day by day, learn the type of clouds, and when it came art time, well, they would go out with their easels and draw pictures of the clouds and that sort of thing. And over a period of a few months, there was a change. The kids were no longer bored. Well, this word got out through the local newspapers, and pretty soon it was hitting the national news. And to make a long story short, Jack Borden realized he had something here which is worth his, well, it was his bliss, following his bliss, if you want to put it that way. But there was the need for some organization, so he founded For Spacious Skies. And I came in on the act, so to speak, through a book that I've written with Fenton Schaefer called Peterson's Field Guide to the Atmosphere. Quite a number of you probably have a Peterson's Field Guide to flowers or to birds or something like that. This is one in the series called Field Guide to the Atmosphere. He was now starting to get some materials to give to school people who asked him for help. And he needed a cloud chart. So he asked me if I would be able to furnish him the pictures for a cloud chart. And I was interested in this whole thing and said yes. And so as a consequence, a cloud chart was produced, and now there is a second version of this cloud chart, which is being used by the Weather Channel. And I have some copies of this here with me. You hold up one side of it. This is a chart titled Look Up, and it was made in conjunction with the Weather Channel. Well, I just wanted to show it up like that. Yeah. And it's being used all around the country. Well, I guess this is a commercial, but if any of you happen to be interested in one of these things, I'm going to pass around a little sign-up sheet here later on, and we can make arrangements for your acquiring an autographed copy. Well, you know, how can I help it? But at any rate, $5. is all the cost. You know, they need normally $10, but for special audiences, well, they're only $5. So Jack Gordon and I have had a very interesting time together for 15 years. Interestingly enough, we've seen each other 2 times only. We've talked on the telephone no more than 5 or 10 times. We write back and forth. He's not on computers, so I can't correspond with him by email. But he's a very interesting man who's devoted his life to a project which, unfortunately, I wish I could report, has not had great success, because he says it's like trying to climb up a glass hill wearing greased boots. People are stubborn. Their consciousness level is set, and it takes a stick of dynamite to change them. So even though this is a great thing, and he has wonderful feedback from students who have been involved in this, it's not a program that has been widely adopted. I wish I could say that it were. The third person that I wanted to talk about in terms of influence on my life is a person whose name is Luke Howard. Mary, I didn't forget. Luke Howard is an Englishman who lived in the late 1700s and well through into the 1800s. He died at 90 years or something like that. But it might come as a surprise to you to realize, to be told that clouds did not have names, per se, prior to 1800. You know, the clouds have been around for a long time, so why didn't they have any names? Well, part of this was that the scientific approach to things was not very widely accepted until approximately that time. In the 1700s and 1800s, scientists were really trying to understand what this thing we call atmosphere is made up of. And there were these various studies that gradually elucidated the presence of oxygen and nitrogen and so forth. Luke Howard, as a young fellow, went to grammar school, sent by his dad out to a place west of London, and he didn't react terribly well to the curriculum of Latin, Greek, and mathematics, but he was more interested in nature as such, and so he roamed the hillsides and looked for plants, and the Linnaean Society was just coming into existence at that time, but he also was looking at the cloud forms. And at the time that he was there in school, this was the time there had been some great volcanic eruptions in Iceland and Japan, and so the upper atmosphere was filled with volcanic dust, and that led to absolutely lurid optical effects, halos and all sorts. And I'm sure this is one of the things that helped get him turned on to the sky. Well, he went back to London, trained to be basically a pharmacist, and then shows up in London when he's a young fellow in his late teens or 20s, early 20s, and he has this driving interest in the sky and clouds. And he started to, observe critically certain patterns. And his thought was there must be certain causes that led to particular types of cloud, other causes that lead to other types of cloud. And in London at that time, there was a group of so-called natural philosophers. These were people whose interest was very lively in a whole bunch of different subjects. And so the pattern was that they would meet as a group called the YCHS, Searchers After Truth, in different people's homes monthly, and then it would be the responsibility of individuals to read papers on their topic, and the papers would be criticized, and if they were good enough, they'd be published, because one of the members of the YCHS had a publishing house. On the wintertime evening of 1802 or 3, 2/3, it was Luke Howard's term, and he read this paper, which he didn't realize, I'm sure, was destined to become a classic in the history of science. It was on the classification of clouds. And here he described cloud systems and cloud forms and identified certain major types. And I won't go through all these in any detail at all, but many of you who are cloud observers, of course, recognize that there's one primary type which has flat bottoms and bumpy tops. And so the genius of Howard's paper was that he went to Latin to get the names. So if you have heap of cloud, in Latin, heap means cumulus. And my desk has accumulated a lot of heaps. Another type of cloud was the layered type of cloud. You know, it was like this layer, wide, skinny, vertical dimension. Layer in Latin is stratus. And then if you get the heaps and the strati living in the same environment together, it's logical there'd be marriages, right? So you have stratus and heap, so stratocumulus becomes another type of common cloud. And then curl of a lady's hair, a girl's hair, is in Latin cirrus, and rain is nimbus, and so forth. So Luke Howard developed these categories of clouds. And they're still substantially used, about the same as he laid them out. I had the opportunity in 1971 to study Luke Howard at some depth, thinking I might write a book about him at one time. Didn't get done, still is to be done. But at any rate, he made a great impact upon my life in terms of understanding the background of clouds and cloud forms. He basically is a role model for me, because in his last years, he was living with his daughter up in the Midlands of England, and in late in the evening hours, you know, it'd get dusk and nearly dark, and they'd wonder where Father Luke was, and he'd come in and he'd say, "Don't bother, I've been out looking at my clouds." My clouds. So, Harry, if you want to know where I am a few years from now, just look out, and I'm going to be looking at Luke Howard's clouds.
I don't know how many of you saw Star Wars, and the young hero named Luke Skywalker. Our kids call him Luke Skywatcher.
Well, over the years, I've gotten into photography, as perhaps some of you know, and taken a lot of cloud pictures. And I'd like to share some of them with you, just as for instances of the wild variety and beauty that one finds in the sky. And I think we're perhaps about ready for that right now. I'm going to probably look for a saucer or something, because I think I want to elevate the projector here. Let's see. Too low? We're still on here? Okay. The thing that I would say at the beginning here, I oftentimes tell my students that there are two ways of looking at clouds, two ways of looking at anything, really. One is where you maximize the appreciative aspects of the picture, and another is to look at the picture critically, analyzing it. So if we look at this from the analytic point of view, you see this is a field of cumulus, fair weather cumulus, and an interesting reflection of the clouds in a placid lake. Cumulus have a flattish base and slightly rounded tops. So this is a typical summer fair weather sky. I haven't organized these in any particular logical fashion, so we sort of jump from one type of sky to another, but this is a sky which is, from the point of view of analysis, made up of high layered clouds that have sort of rolls in them, or billows, we say. And altostratus or altocumulus billow. And of course, the difference from a photographer's point of view between a landscape and a cloudscape is that if you're a cloud photographer, the landform complements the sky. In a landscape situation, the sky complements the landform. So this would be really a cloudscape. This little cabin off in western Utah was occupied 100 years ago by some pioneers. The sky is wild cirrus. See the wisps that look like the curls? These are trailing ice crystals. And another wild cirrus sky. The building down at the bottom is the Episcopal Church, and this was a great outbreak of jet stream cirrus. Clouds appearing at 30, 40,000 feet. This view was taken down in New Mexico at Abacu. The old adobe dwelling, still standing, but barely, and a sky of flat bottoms and rounded tops, swelling cumulus by name. The Willamette Valley, of course, is a beautiful stretch of land. This looks like it might have been taken near Yamhill. Once again, the clouds, flat bottom with rounded tops, swelling cumulus, and then high in the sky are cirrus and cirrocumulus. This definitely is Yamhill County, taken on the Lincoln Cutoff, the graveyard there to the left of the brow of the hill. The thing about the sky is many times there are more than just pure types. There are types that are in the process of forming and dissipating, a variety of types at different levels. So here we have, that's illustrated with the cumulus type of cloud in the upper portion and cirrus and altostratus at higher levels. Pure example of fair weather cumulus taken in the late summertime. Another example, this being actually a picture taken in England. Clouds are the same in England as they are in America. Cumulus, stratus, fractostratus, and then some high cirrus. The high desert country. Now here you notice instead of the flat bottomed and isolated puffs, the clouds are sort of grouped together. This would lead one to call this stratocumulus rather than pure cumulus, although pure fair weather cumulus are to the left. I think I showed that one. Here is an interesting sky, but even more interesting is the windy road that leads back into the background. So this would be probably more of a landscape than a cloudscape. I did not coerce that gentleman to stand there and let his picture be taken. He was there, I happened to be there. He's standing there looking out to sea. Cloud is developing some precipitation to the right. Big mass of cumuliform type of cloud. The observer, I have called that picture. Well, here are a lot of observers. They have to be sitting on their perches and looking at the field of swelling cumulus. And no doubt twittering away and commenting on how beautiful the cloudscape is. Some massive clouds are like barriers to the airflow that's coming over the top, and the lifting of the airflow over the top of the cloud, which is a cumulus congestus, produces the lid effect. That one is not probably yet to thunderhead stage, but it's getting there. Here the cirrus is quite thick. This is the famous cross there at Sedona, Arizona. And another view from Sedona showing the thunderheads now flattening to the top. The anvil type of cumulonimbus clouds off over the mountains, and cirrus aloft. This was shot from Hill Road, and it's a beautiful example of a type of cirrus, which is one of the most beautiful, named Cirrus uncinus, otherwise sometimes known as hook cirrus. And you see the trails of ice crystals falling behind as the main body of the cloud moves from left to right faster than the trails, which eventually evaporate. One summer I was in Boulder, Colorado, and this massive cumulonimbus cloud appeared one evening. If you were to look at the top of this, you'd be looking at the base of the stratosphere, and the base of the stratosphere acts like a plexiglass lid to vertical development of the clouds, so the cloud spreads out and produces this great big lid or anvil. And many cumulus, active cumulus towers there at work in the body of the cloud. So that cloud certainly would be producing hail, I would expect, or lightning, good reflection in the lake. Another one of the lid clouds. Oh dear. It always happens. The sea fog from the ocean in normal years, not El Nino years, rolls in through the Golden Gate Bridge and on into the bay. As I was telling the seniors about this, I couldn't refrain from telling them about a couple experiences that I've had. One was in the early days when I was a forecaster with Pan American Airways and a flight meteorologist, and on this one occasion we were flying in one of the clipper planes from Honolulu, and Captain Hamilton was sort of a daring fellow, so on a whim he decided, well, I think we'll just fly in underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, which we did. And then on another occasion, we family were coming back from England on the Oriana, and we steamed in underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, and that was a wonderful experience to do that, but also to think of flying under it made it doubly meaningful. Sometimes the fog gets sort of stashed up against the coastal hills. And in this case, I didn't happen to take that picture, but it looks interesting. Taken at the top of Mount Rainier, it looks like Mr. Winter with his mustachio, doesn't it? Frost. And another view of Mount Rainier and the high stratus cloud. One time it had rained heavily during the night. We were coming back from the coast just to see the wet ground now rapidly evaporating water vapor as the sun warmed its surface, and water vapor immediately condensing into fog on the little salt particles that were in the air. Incorrectly called steam, I might say. Scotland picture showing middle-level clouds developing precipitation. If I remember correctly, it was at Loch Linney. Nice evening shot. This sky probably would have developed a thunderstorm during later in the day. It's a high altocumulus, so-called altocumulus castellanus, and indicative of an unstable atmosphere. But look at the variety of those two types of clouds. the lower cumulus, and then the upper level, things are going on to produce this roll structure or billow structure. And the cause of the billow structure is what's called shearing motion. And if you can visualize at the level directly below the cloud, the wind blowing in one direction with a certain speed, and above the cloud level in a 45-degree angle to the lower with a different speed. The resulting conflict of those two wind directions produces the shearing motion, which generates rising and falling of the atmosphere. Because when you have rising air, you have cooling and humidifying air, eventually condensation. That means that the lines along which you see the cloud are regions in which the air is rising. In between, the air is sinking. So you can sort of think of cigars turning and rotating and producing that type of cloud. That's the analytic part. This is just a wild sky. In Eastern Oregon, in this particular case, here we have the development of a kind of cloud called lenticular cumulus, with rising and falling air producing the scene you see there at the lower portion of the sky. In this case, a shower out to sea coming from the cumulonimbus cloud. Another one similar to that one we saw before. Here, that same phenomenon of billow production is in existence. Altocumulus and cirrus, thin cirrus in dusk. This remarkable sky is to be found in conjunction with the cumulonimbus cloud, the granddaddy of all cumulus clouds, which produces sort of shelves of cloud around it, and on the under portion of the shelf of cloud find these downward pushing pouches, or mamata. So this is a mamata sky. That's a similar one, but not appropriately lighted. Of course, optical phenomena in the sky are to be prized. I dare say that rainbows have been here forever, probably a little earlier than the people who wrote the Old Testament testified. Theoretical statement. Here we have a single and a double rainbow, and one of the intentions that I had in my meteorology class this last January was to get the people out of that class with the capability of explaining the geometrical optics of the rainbow, so they know why the interior color was blue and the exterior red in the primary bow and reversed in the secondary bow. Another rainbow picture. Took this one in New Zealand, and it was sort of a unusual positioning for a rainbow, but the showers were on the opposite side of me from the sun, so there was just this little segment that was portrayed in that valley. My brother took that picture in Kauai with a telephoto lens. Another example of the hooked cirrus. The two optical phenomena are illustrated here. One, the circular ring, is a halo. This is caused by refraction of light passing from the sun through ice crystals of the cirrostratus cloud. And then the bright shaft vertically is called a sun pillar, which comes from reflection of the sun's rays from the top sides of hexagonal ice crystals. Another halo, a little dimmer. And of course, in the evenings, we have the effect of scattering out of light, blue light, and giving clouds the reddish orangey tinges. which are associated with sunset colors. I like this picture always because it shows these children getting in the last minutes of play on the beach before they have to get in and go to bed. Think how dull life on Earth would be without the presence of clouds. Did you ever stop and think that of all the meteorological variables, that the one that is most directly visible is clouds, and that if we didn't have clouds, we would have no rain or snow? This would be an arid planet. This is another shot of that one. Another rainbow. Looks like that one is looming out and about ready to fall on us, doesn't it? Well, what can we say about that one? It's a jumble of cloud. It's sort of interesting. I like that one. Rainbow. Rainbow Bridge. Rainbow Bridge, right. And sunset of Camp Magruder, the cross. I believe that's the last one. Well, I tell you what I did out at the residential estates. I was sort of joking, but maybe they didn't know whether I was joking. But I said to them, now, if any of you will commit yourself to become cloud watchers, I'll give you one of these cloud charts for free. Otherwise, it'll cost you $5. Well, comes the end of the program, and I said, well, now, how many of you want your free cloud chart? Silence. So, since I was joking, then I gave one to each one of them. But when I gave them, I said, now, I'm giving you a cloud chart now. Hold up your hands. I swear I will look at clouds 3 times a day and keep record of them. Enjoy talking to you.
My husband was a farm boy all his life. He was a cloud watcher all his life. He became an amateur weather forecaster. He can tell from day to day what's going to happen.
All right. More or less. Well, thanks again. Enjoyed it.
At the Methodist Church. We're back to the Methodist Church. The Christian church we have been using is occupied that night. And our speaker will be Arlie Holt from Polk County, who's going to tell, he's calling it the Further Confessions of a Drunk Junkie.
Before you take off, I want you to thank whoever was responsible for bringing George and Abe with us tonight instead of the table. That's Twyla brought George and Abe with us tonight. George and Abe. Anyhow, thank you a lot, people, and keep right on trucking.